Hello, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here. I grew up in Sunnyvale, right on the edge of Mountain View. My closest farmers market was the one on Castro, and I have very fond memories of going to middle school up on Ringstorff. I really love being able to speak to folks online when there's more interaction, so I don't feel like I'm speaking to myself. So I would love to utilize the chat. If you all would just be willing to share with me one favorite park in Mountain View, that would be really grounding, and it could be very place-based. So please share in the chat any parks that you enjoy in Mountain View. Maybe it's Eagle Park, maybe it's Cuesta Park. I thought you would say that, Mohan. Cuesta Park is wonderful. Any other folks? Shoreline, I remember running there a lot when I was growing up. It's good to see so much representation. Oh my goodness, I don't even know all of these different parks. Thank you for sharing. It's really good to be able to speak to all of you tonight and to, again, be grounded in such a wonderful place as Mountain View. My organization, Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, was actually founded at UC Berkeley. So after I grew up in the South Bay, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, I did go to UC Berkeley for undergrad, where I met somebody who really recognized that a lot of the courses at UC Berkeley and many universities touch on public health, social justice, the environment, but they weren't talking about food choices. And so my friends started to give these presentations to the classes at UC Berkeley, and the professors just really loved them. And we've just grown into this national organization. I have a brief outline of what I'll be going over today. The first is what factory farming is and how it began, not necessarily going into every single detail, but just sort of understanding what the system is like, and then delving into how it impacts the environment and our health, which I think are really inextricable. And then we'll be talking about the potential solutions to these issues on both personal and global scales. Oh, and thank you to Christine, who's joining us from Sonoma. That's really wonderful as well. Thank you for coming. I wanted to acknowledge that factory farming is sometimes a rather disturbing topic for a lot of people, but please know that I came here very excited to share this information. I did not come to traumatize anybody. There's nothing gory in anything that we're sharing tonight. And there are also a lot of sections where we'll just have an opportunity to ask questions. In fact, asking questions in the chat makes it a lot more interesting for me. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout our presentation today. All right, so first question I have for all of you is, who remembers the song Old MacDonald? Does anybody know that song, Old MacDonald Had a Farm? Just feel free to write yes or no in the chat. Okay, Mary is saying yes. Quite a few of you, yes, right? And you know, that's the song that we grew up singing in preschool and in kindergarten. And I remember growing up, I grew up right near where 85 hits 280. I remember driving along 280, maybe going to Deer Hollow Farm, Happy Hollow, and thinking like, this is what a farm is. And whenever I went grocery shopping, this package that you're seeing right here is what I saw. And I just assumed that all these cows and animals were very happy that this is what we had, where our food was coming from. But what we're here to talk about today is, in the vast majority of cases, most of our food is coming from what's called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. And it's the practice of keeping thousands of animals in confinement, often for their whole lives. And this is done to produce the most product for the most profit. So to get a sense of the scale, I was wondering if folks in the chat, could you just guess how many animals are bred and killed for food every year in the US? Just a number, just for in the US. Looking for some guesses right now. Please don't be shy. 5 million, thank you so much, Jan. Seeing some numbers in the billions. Some of you are typing it out. I'm writing a million, 5 million. Something that might be helpful is keeping in mind the total US population, which is around 340 million. And as you think about our 340 million folks here in the United States, do you see them eating animal products, you know, once a week, every day, twice a day? I don't think that I've seen the exact answer yet, but many people have been very close. The answer is 10 billion. All right, so that's about 285 animals killed every single second for food. All right, and of those, and that does not include all the fish as well. So we've got these 10 billion animals being raised and killed for food here in the United States, which is more than the entire world human population. Of those 10 billion animals raised in the US, does anyone want to guess what percentage of them are raised on factory farms? Any guesses? What percentage? So I'm looking for a number between 0 and 100%. Jennifer and Jan already in the 90s, some folks in the 70s and 80s. Thank you so much for your guesses. It turns out that 99% of all animals raised in the US are raised on factory farms. So pretty much any meat that you are seeing in a restaurant or at the supermarket is coming from a factory farm. And that's really why I do this work, because I know that there's sometimes emphasis on all these different places where animals could be raised. But when it comes down to it, 99% of them are coming from factory farms. And that's what we really need to be addressing. Now, to understand factory farming, it does help to understand the underlying mindset. And this was really summed up best by the trade magazine, National Hog Farmer magazine. They say, the breeding sow should be thought of and treated as a valuable piece of machinery whose function is to pump out baby pigs like a sausage machine. So on factory farms, animals are no longer thought of as living sentient beings. They are thought of as units of production. And it is this mindset that allows us to treat these animals in a way that we would never dream of treating our dogs or our cats. And the hallmark of factory farming is this intensive confinement. So we have this situation where we put pigs in very small spaces, and the problem was that then the mother pigs didn't have enough room. They were lying on top of their babies. They were suffocating them, which led to these crates that are so small that the pigs cannot even turn around. The issue that we're seeing is these unnatural solutions for these unnatural problems that we've created. And that's just the situation over and over again. Cow's milk doesn't just magically appear. The cows have to be impregnated. They have to have a baby. They have to be separated from their mother. So this is the natural solution that we've come up with. Veal. Here we see chickens on a factory farm. Chickens are crowded into spaces so small, it's about the size of a piece of paper, and they cannot do their natural behavior of pecking. So they will actually start to hurt each other. They will go crazy, and that could cause a serious harm to not just the animals, but to profits. And our unnatural solution to that problem is that we cut off their beaks without any anesthetics. So this is the situation that we have. Now, I know that a lot of folks, especially in a city like Mountain View, are extraordinarily cognizant of what the various labels are at their grocery stores. It would be helpful for me right now if folks shared in the chat where they are shopping. That would be really helpful. Are you shopping at Whole Foods? Are you shopping at Trader Joe's, the farmer's market, and Safeway? Okay, I'm seeing some Trader Joe's and some Whole Foods. Where else are folks shopping? Where are you getting these products? Safeway, okay. Yep. Farmer's market, Sprouts. All right. Ava's, I'm not sure I know where that is. Okay, I'll look that one up. Since I have been to quite a few of these, yeah, Helen, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. Have folks seen labels such as cage-free in any of these grocery stores before? Just say yes if you have seen that. Yeah, in your grocery stores. Okay. So again, this is a term that sounds really wonderful, and it is starting to be more and more common. The issue is that cage-free often doesn't mean that idyllic picture that we were talking about earlier with Old MacDonald. This right here is an example of a very common cage-free farm. So you can see that the chickens are technically not in their tiny little battery cages, but they're still crammed into these sheds. It's just essentially a larger cage. You might have also heard of the term free range. Please put in the chat if you're seeing that at your grocery store, whether it's Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. If you're seeing free range. Yeah, so we brought in this example very specifically because we are from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I want to share with you this package of eggs. And on the package, it says, these hens are raised in wide open spaces in Sonoma Valley where they are free to roam, scratch, and play. And the picture on the right is what that farm actually does look like. And you can see from the top that the chickens aren't really running around outside. In fact, as long as there's a door, theoretically, that could count as free range, even if the chickens aren't running around outside of it. And does anybody know what this pink stuff is out here? We'll be getting to that. Now, Judy's family farm which had this package of eggs and all of this labeling, it sounds really wonderful. It's got the word family in it. It supplies really well-known brands like Whole Foods 365, Organic Valley, brands that I believe a lot of people are paying extra for because they do want to support this ideal of Old McDonald. And the truth of the matter is that there's just so much demand for these animal products. I've been very fortunate to present in many different places all over the Bay. And interestingly, when I talk to students at, for example, San Francisco City College, where most of the students are immigrants, and I ask them, how many of you since moving to the United States started to increase the amount of animal products that you are consuming? Every single student has raised their hand. So the demand for animal products has just really increased. Sometimes in my presentations, in fact, there might be somebody here who raises chickens in their backyard. Feel free to let me know if you are one of those people who does that. If you're raising a chicken in a backyard, you know that those chickens will not be supplying an egg every day, 365 days a year. And is that a way to supply Whole Foods, to supply Trader Joe's? It's not, right? So there's a huge amount of demand for these products, which is what leads to these really intense conditions. Okay. Are there any questions about what factory farms are? I just want to make sure that we're somewhat on the same page as we delve into the impacts of this on the environment. Yes, okay. Okay, yes, Christine has raised chickens in her backyard. Feel free to share about that experience. Pasture raised, there's a lot of different certifications for that. So Helen, feel free to put in the chat and we can do some more research as well. All right, so talking about the environmental impacts of factory farming, which are tied directly to public health. Something that has really shocked me is the knowledge that animal agriculture is one of the single most environmentally destructive industries on the planet. And that's just really confused me because growing up in Sunnyvale, growing up on the Peninsula, Mountain View area, I feel like we've been taught that oil spills in the San Francisco Bay are really terrible. The Chevron refinery spewing smoke, or the cement factory, that's what's really terrible for the planet. I had no idea that the food that we were eating, Old McDonald, how could it be so bad? And it really, again, comes down to that scale of those 10 billion animals bred and killed every single year in the United States. Those are living, breathing, eating, pooping animals. And the issues just come from trying to raise all those animals. First of all, what are they eating? As many of you can imagine, it requires a lot of food. Have any of you ever been to the Midwest before? Anybody in this group ever been to the Midwest? Have you ever seen those areas that used to be prairies and marshes? Like, have you ever just seen corn and soy as far as the eye can see? And so Jan, yeah, please let us know. Yeah, tons of corn, right? These crops are not being fed primarily to people. They're grown to feed to animals on factory farms. And a question I have for you all is, how many calories of plants do you think it takes to make just 1 calorie of beef? How many calories of plants does it take to make 1 calorie of beef? Is it a 1-for-1? For every calorie of corn, you get 1 calorie of beef? You know, like giving me some really high numbers. It's about 25, but that's still really, really significant. So we have this study, and by the way, all citations for our presentations are at the bottom of every single slide. We have found that if everyone around the world ate half as much meat, and we use all of that farmland to grow fruits, vegetables, legumes to feed directly to people, rather than growing corn and soy to feed to animals on factory farms, we could theoretically feed every single person on Earth today, plus an extra 2 billion people. There's a lot of talk about how we're going to feed this growing global population, and a critical part of the answer is eating more efficiently by eating lower on the food chain. There's a lot that would go into that, but the point is we are growing a lot of corn and a lot of soybeans, and that's being fed to animals and not directly to people. All of this animal feed also requires huge amounts of land. It's a leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon. Bay Area folks, how used to are we now to all the smoke from fires? You've probably heard about the fires in the Amazon. Not a lot of people realize that the fire in the Amazon was set intentionally to clear the land to graze beef cattle or to grow corn and soy to feed to animals on factory farms, which of course has huge impacts on reducing biodiversity, which is very critical for surviving pandemics and extreme weather events. So there's a lot of concerns about what we're doing to our Amazon rainforest. In terms of water, with all this corn and soy, it's extremely intensive. Folks in the Bay Area, I grew up in a place where we were just told, you know what, we have this drought. There are things that we can all be doing to take part and to save water. What are some of the things that we've all been told to do to save water over and over again in school? What do you tell your children? What do you hear your children say whenever the drought comes up? What have they been taught? Yeah, take military showers, 5-minute showers. I used to work at Nature Bridge in Marin County. We made the kids take 2-minute showers. There was a lot of emphasis on saving the planet. Take shorter showers as much as possible. Yeah, Jan, let your lawn die. Don't flush the toilet. If it's yellow, let it mellow. All these things that we've tried to do as environmentally conscious folks. Truth of the matter, though, is that the impact from animal agriculture is just so great. In fact, not drinking a gallon of milk is the equivalent of saving, entire month's worth of showers. Sometimes, I think in California especially, we're very concerned about water usage when it comes to drinking alternative milks, especially with almond milk, which is why I wanted to share this particular graphic with you. This is from the New York Times, and it shows the amount of water usage for each of these various milks and milk alternatives, the cow, rice, soy, oat, and almond. And you can see that, yes, almond milk does use a significant amount of water, but cow's milk uses a whole lot more water. And then there's all these other things to consider with land use and carbon emissions. So there are a lot of factors to consider. But this is a resource that is available to folks as they're thinking about what milk they might want to consume. And I also share this because I don't want anybody after this presentation to say, Monica told me to drink this exact thing. I do believe that there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot to be weighing. You might be focused solely on water usage, but you might also need to be more holistic in thinking about your carbon emissions or your land usage and so on. All right. Another issue, of course, with all of this water and soy and corn being grown and fed to the animals, that then the animals poop it out and we just really don't know what to do with it. I've gotten the sense that there are a lot of adults on this call tonight, but when I'm speaking to students, I ask them, what should we do with all of this poop? And I think that because school gardens are much more common, they're starting to think like, maybe this can all be composted. Maybe that's the first thing that you thought of as well. Maybe it can be composted. The issue is that there's all these antibiotics, pesticides, and essentially some of this waste is really toxic. So I'm going to share with you what happens to this waste and how we dispose of it in this very short little video here.
You're looking at a lake of toxic pig feces and urine, the size of 4 football fields. That's because thousands upon thousands of pigs are inside of these buildings. Their waste falls through slats in the concrete floor, and it's flushed directly into this giant open-air cesspool. How many of these kinds of factories are there? In North Carolina alone, there are over 2,000, and the consequences are disastrous.
The waste falls through the floors. It's flushed out into an open pit, like a cesspool. It's easy for a big hog operation to have as much waste as a medium-sized city. Of course, the pit will fill up, so it has to be emptied, and they're emptied by spraying the liquid waste. If you're familiar with a garden sprayer, they're gigantic versions of that. So they're making droplets, fine mists out of this liquid waste, and that can drift downwind into the neighboring communities.
So this is where they spray out no waste on us. This is about 8 feet from my mother's house.
What is it like when the mist is?
It's like, you think it's raining?
Really?
You think it's raining. We don't open the doors of the windows, but the odor still comes in. It takes your breath away.
All right, so in case you didn't catch that, what they are doing is they are spraying this waste like a garden hose. They are spraying it into the air, which is impacting the communities around them. And one of the terms that Steve in this video actually pulls out is environmental racism, which I want to touch on because as a kid growing, I went to Homestead High School. And at that time when I was growing up, I really feel like the education taught us that Racism doesn't exist anymore because people can sit wherever they want on the bus. They can sit in the front, they can sit in the back, they can drink out of whatever water fountain they want. So unpacking what environmental racism was really important for me. If a factory farm wanted to open up in Silicon Valley, right, one of those big hog factory farms, do you feel that the residents of Mountain View, the city council, would just say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's open up this hog factory farm? No, right? We wouldn't do that, Helen. We would say, we would organize, we would fight back, we would use our political power, we would utilize our financial power. We would say, we do not want our children to get sick, to have asthma. We need to be able to breathe. So where do hog factory farms open up? In a community that doesn't have those resources. And they tend to be communities of color. And there's a whole lot more that I could say about the people who have spoken up and the history of the land and everything like that. But if folks are interested in this, this is something that I'm actually really passionate about, and something that we're really trying to raise awareness of, is these connections with environmental racism and public health, and also what these factory farms are doing. Many people say, oh, Monica, why don't people just leave the land? It's very hard to leave the land because it's not as though property values skyrocket when a hog factory farm opens up. And amazingly, these factory farms are exempt from the Clean Air Act, even though they are emitting hydrogen sulfide and ammonia at levels 10 times than what's legally allowed for other industries. There was a time when there was so much effort and the EPA was saying, like, let's try and regulate this. And ultimately the factory farms said, no, we cannot do this. We are so different from a Chevron, from somebody with a very specific one pipe. So we need to figure out how to regulate ourselves. And that's what's going on at this moment. So we have a lot of time right now for the industries to figure out how to regulate themselves. And of course, this is not a surprise to all of you here on this call. This all has a huge impact on climate change. According to our most recent data sourced from Climate Watch, transportation emits about 16% of the world's greenhouse gases. If you add up the emission from livestock and manure, soil, crop burning, deforestation, energy, and agriculture, it's about a similar percentage at around 16, 17%. I've seen numbers that are higher, but just conservatively, even 1% would be significant. 17%, this is a huge percentage and something that does need to be addressed. And we'll be talking about how it is going to be addressed. All right, and the final thing that I want to talk about in our environmental section is just how factory farming affects the environment and its role in emerging infectious diseases. There's been a lot of conversation over the past 2 years about COVID-19, and I do not think that we have yet really made clear the explicit connection between how we are growing our animal products, say growing, and diseases, swine flu, avian flu, COVID-19. There are implications for all of this. So according to the United Nations, there are 5 major factors that contribute to the spread of emerging diseases, and animal agriculture plays a major role in every single one of them. So first, because of deforestation, humans and livestock are becoming more and more exposed to diseases that used to only be found in wildlife, such as bats. The livestock can easily become infected with the diseases from these wild animals and then spread the disease to humans. Climate change also accelerates the evolution of these new pathogens, making it easier for them to infect new hosts like livestock and humans. Third, when we change the land from forest or whatever else it used to be, and we turn that into feedlots, we are killing and displacing wildlife and reducing biodiversity. And the reduction in biodiversity also amplifies the likelihood of disease spread. So evidence is suggesting that as climate change gets worse and humans continue to encroach upon wildlife, then spread of diseases such as COVID-19 will become more frequent. The American Public Health Association has actually urged for a moratorium on factory farms. All right, so I'm already starting to get into these health implications. These animals are living in filth. They are getting sick. So the solution has been to give these animals a lot of antibiotics. Has anybody in this group ever been on antibiotics before? Please put in the chat if you know, if you've ever been on antibiotics. Okay, Sarah, Helen, Mohan. So it's very common for, I think, for people to be on antibiotics. Okay, Jan, you're saying no more, but why? Lauren, it's so good to see you. Why did your doctor not tell you, hey, Jan, antibiotics are great. You don't get sick on them. Like, just keep on taking more and more antibiotics for the rest of your life. Okay. Okay, Jan, because you're saying no more, but why else would a doctor say it's not a good idea to continue these antibiotics past, I don't know, a week? Why not continue taking them forever? Yeah, so Sarah's talking about how they kill the good bacteria too. You can also become resistant to them, right? So we have this situation where these animals are living in filth. They are potentially getting sick. So we give them antibiotics, which creates the perfect environment for antibiotic resistant bacteria. So then we give them more antibiotics, which again creates the perfect environment for antibiotic resistant bacteria, which leads to these terrible superbugs. And that's what's really dangerous. That's what seems to have happened with swine flu, which is thought to have started at a Smithfield pork factory farm. There's what's really scary is avian flu. People are starting to eat more and more chickens. And avian flu outbreaks on poultry farms is absolutely very concerning. Swine flu, H1N1, killing many, many millions of people. So that's just like how it's influencing us from like a public health perspective. On an individual level, again, going back to the students at City College of San Francisco, people in the United States are eating way more animal products than our ancestors ever did. And if you look at the top 10 leading causes of death, at least these 4 or 5 are related to eating more and more of the standard American diet, eating more and more of these animal products. None of our ancestors ate this way before. Amazingly, we're at a very different stage than we were, I think, even 20 years ago. When I first started to think about consuming less animal products, my grandmother, who by the way lives in Palo Alto, so very close, she said to me, Monica, you are going to die. she really, do you all remember the food pyramid growing up? Do you all remember? And it had this very specific section on eating animal products. Yes, some of you are remembering it, that the food pyramid was what was taught to me in school. That's what my grandmother saw as the leading guide on what to be eating. Interestingly, though, we are changing. We now have what's called My Plate, and it has, a very specific section of a plate that says protein, but it doesn't specify animal products. So that's some improvement. And doctors at Kaiser Permanente, and many of you probably have Kaiser as your health insurance, their doctors are actually starting to recommend a plant-based diet to their patients. They're saying you can actually be very healthy eating plant-based. Where are you going to get your protein from? If not from meat? Sorry to those of you who are already not eating a lot of animal products, but I do think that it's worthwhile to note that there's so many good resources on where you can be getting your protein from. You can be referring to all of the athletes who are getting their foods from protein from plant-based sources. And then I do think that it's important to share the Game Changers trailer for folks, whether it's, my grandmother or people in your life who are really concerned about not getting enough protein. So I'm going to share that really briefly, and then we'll delve into some solutions.
One and only Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I ate a lot of meat. They showed us commercials.
Steak. That's what a man eats.
Selling that idea that real men eat meat.
Serious man food.
But you got to understand, that's marketing. That's not based on reality.
I've been teaching fighting techniques to government agencies for more than 15 years. Then I got injured. Unable to teach for at least 6 months. I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful, eating only plants?
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. And I actually became like a machine.
One of the biggest misconceptions in sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
Sometimes you have to do things that your competitors aren't doing.
Today's blood and yesterday's blood. Yeah.
I think this is going to wake a lot of people up. I was recovering better, not getting as sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
You want to feel great, have more energy.
cholesterol was 276. Today, 169.
Whoa, now you're talking. Most guys my age can keep up with the grandchildren. My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
I'm pausing it there. If you have seen this movie and recommend it, please let us know in the chat. I think that it's available on Netflix for free, assuming you have a Netflix subscription. Somebody who's out there, if you can help verify that, that would be very helpful. People are saying you don't need huge amounts of protein. It's very interesting, the emphasis on protein in this country and muscle and masculinity and everything like that. Watching this, yeah, Lauren, it's a really good movie to watch for sure. You very rarely hear people going to the hospital because of a protein deficiency. You do hear about people having cardiovascular disease and diabetes and other things that are related to an overconsumption of animal products. So I'm not saying that, well, I just want to be clear that you can get enough protein on a plant-based diet. That really shouldn't be the primary concern. And there's a lot more that we could be unpacking here. So as questions are coming up, please feel free to share them with everybody. I do want to talk, Holger, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. That's a really good question about vegetarian Indians, and I'll make sure that we get to that at the end of this presentation. All right, so what are the solutions here? Well, there's a lot that can be done in terms of passing laws. You're starting to see the various efforts at the state level, at the federal level to be making some kind of impact. One is the Farm Systems Reform Act. And even if these laws aren't passed, one thing to note is that it does serve the purpose of educating folks. So I'm not necessarily endorsing any specific thing, but I want to let you know the different ways that folks are approaching these solutions. There are some folks that are working on what's called corporate concessions. So applying pressure to corporations can help change the system and getting certain companies to commit to not raising animals in certain ways. And there have been a lot of corporate wins, and folks in this group can probably even share some of the organizations that are working on that. Overall, though, the basic solution is pretty simple. We do need to reduce our animal product consumption. World leaders from many different countries have come together and say that we cannot continue to eat meat multiple times per day. The United Nations has urged first world citizens to become what they call demetarians by eating half as much meat. The quote below is about the far greater reduction that needs to help keep climate change under 2 degrees, which I think is going to be very challenging. I'm very realistic in all of this, but I'm sharing this because I want you all to know that there are a lot of folks that have done a ton of academic research into this and realize that, yes, we do need to reduce our animal product consumption. How we make that change is, of course, very up in the air. And there's some good discussion that I think that we could all be having around that. The renowned climate activist Paul Hawken recently came out with a book called Drawdown that outlines the top 100 scientific solutions to drawing down carbon emissions. Is anybody familiar with Project Drawdown? They have a website as well. Okay, great. What I find very interesting is that 2 of the top 5 solutions do relate to food, right? Number 3 is reducing food waste, and number 4 is these plant-rich diets. They rank ahead of solar, mass transit, electric cars. This is truly one of the most important actions we can take to help reduce the impacts of climate change. I really think that it's important to talk about with people because the average person, whether it's a student or a resident in Mountain View, how many of us really get involved in refrigerant management? Not a lot of us, right? That seems, and I have to also say that I am a millennial. I am somebody who is very aware of a lot of the challenges in this world. And I've worked in a lot of places where we talk about the devastating impacts and this eco-anxiety. I talk to students every single day about this. It's very, very depressing. And some of you can probably relate to how depressing it is when you really think about the future of our planet. Refrigerant management, it's something, again, that not a lot of us have a lot of impact on. But food, yes. And that's why I really like to focus on food. Food is something that unites us. Food is something that each of us can have an impact on. Some of us are able to make choices. Some of us are able to influence our schools, our cafeterias, our corporate catering, what our families are eating, and so on. So there are opportunities for us to make change through food. This particular stat, if anybody is interested, is one that I often find can be really helpful in sharing with folks. The Environmental Working Group found that if Americans didn't eat meat or dairy just one day a week, it would be like taking 7.6 million cars off of the road. And sometimes I'll just ask, like, what seems more realistic? Convincing everybody in your family and your neighbor and everybody on the block to just sell their cars and never drive again? Or encouraging people to just one day a week eat a burrito of rice and beans with salsa and guacamole. That is one of the most effective and realistic ways that we can reduce the impacts of climate change. There's a lot of forces at play that we can think about in terms of what's making this more accessible. There are a growing number of delicious plant-based products available at stores that a lot of people are shopping at. Stores like Target, stores like Walmart. So that's improving access for a lot of people. I think that the economics of this are really important. So, there was a time when Gardein crispy tenders were very expensive and only found in specialty stores like Whole Foods. But as demand for those products has increased, supply has increased, and their availability in a lot of different stores has increased and cost has gone down. So there is something to be said about the consumer demand. Ben & Jerry's came out with this non-dairy ice cream line because there was so much interest in all of it. And I would have a lot more to say about dairy if folks are interested as well. If people are starting to eat more plant-based, I would encourage them to not necessarily just substitute what they are already eating, but to really explore everything that is available. There's so many different ethnic cuisines that have a lot of plant-based options. That can be Greek food, it can be Mexican food, it can be Chinese food. There's so many different things, Ethiopian food. If you are eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich though on whole wheat bread, that contains just as much protein as a Big Mac though. Oh, that's really good to know, Jen. Another message that we found to be really helpful is to talk about just increasing the amounts of fruits and vegetables that people are eating. Nearly 9 out of 10 Americans don't reach the minimum recommended daily intake of vegetables. And there's marketing that I think is associated with this that I want to share with all of you. So as an example, at this one university, research assistants monitored the number of diners who chose green beans, and they had different labels for green beans. And so I'm asking people right now to think about places where you might have an option to choose green beans. Do you think you are likely to choose the green beans that are labeled green beans, light and low carb green beans and shallots, healthy energy boosting green beans and shallots, or sweet sizzling green beans and crispy shallots? So the researchers monitored this lunch period for an entire academic quarter. Which option do you think got selected the most? A, B, C, or D? I'm seeing a lot of D's at this point. It's interesting, right? Because a lot of folks associate green beans with health. Maybe you're thinking, oh, people want to have weight loss. Well, it turns out that labeling vegetables with indulgent descriptions resulted in more diners choosing the vegetable and a greater mass of vegetables served each day. They went with that, what's called D, what we're labeling indulgent labeling, 25% more than basic labeling. So people may say they want to choose the healthy option, but when it comes to food in general, we go for the items that are described more deliciously. All right, here's another thing that I'm seeing often. It might be at catering. This might be your menu with catering. It might be at some kind of restaurant, but you'll often see things like your entree options are the saffron marinade chicken breast, oven dried tomato polenta, artichoke hoods, grilled zucchini and microgreen salad. Lots of description, right? Grilled mahi, red lentil onion ragu, green onion, crispy chickpeas. And then 3 is vegan entree option, TBD. If you're trying to get people to eat the vegan entree option, you have to agree that if it's listed as 3rd and the last and final option, it doesn't seem as important. It's specifically being labeled as vegan and not described, and it's listed as TBD. So if your goal is to encourage more people to choose the plant-based option, do you think that this menu and the way that it's written is really going to encourage that? No, right? So there's a lot that we can be doing to in terms of thinking about how we are selling these plant-based options. if folks are at all involved in all you care to eat dining facilities, we have a lot of recommendations that we can share. Going back to, I think, this slide. Yeah, nope. Oh, it's here, right here. At the bottom of this slide, it says greenerbydefault.com. It's an organization that I highly recommend checking out. That's their URL. They will support any one of you right now, whether you are working with a school, a university, a company, whether it's Google or Microsoft, wherever, and help connect your dining directors to some specific recommendations and really just make that menu a lot more appealing. And honestly, that's one of the best things that you can do to help encourage people to choose more plant-based options, or even just start, and I'm not even saying exclusively, just starting to choose more of the plant-based options would be a start to all of this. So again, greener by default. They're essentially just trying to flip the script sometimes. In some of their programs, everything will be plant-based to start off, and then you have to opt into the animal protein. And that one simple switch where the plant-based is the default just means a lot of people are going to get the plant-based option because they don't have to choose the weird, strange plant-based option, as it is framed sometimes. I want to note that eating plant-based doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. A person eating plant-based for a year can save $750 on groceries. And there are a lot of groups out there, including plantbasedonabudget.com. It sounds like some folks in our audience today are already starting to eat more plant-based. Feel free to share some resources on there. I definitely empathize that it can be a lot to figure out how to feed a family on a budget, how to make sure you're getting the nutrition that everybody in the family needs, whether it's the elderly, whether it's children, babies. There are a lot of resources out there to help you. And now I just want to focus a little bit more on how we can make small changes. I think that many of you have heard of routine-based changes. If you are somebody who is drinking cow's milk and you want to choose oat milk one time, and that is the step that you want to take, that's fantastic. If you are going to label yourself a vegetarian, that's fantastic, but you don't have to be fully vegetarian in order to just choose that oat milk that one time. If you want to start thinking about just reducing the impact, so instead of having a steak take up your whole plate, but having a bowl, filling it with rice and veggies and putting tiny amounts of steak on top, that still makes an impact. There are 30-day vegan challenges. There are ways to think about our food choices. Every time you have a choice of what to eat, think about who you are, what your values are, and what kind of world you want to create. You can either take your money and literally pay these companies to continue making workers suffer, abusing and killing animals and destroying the environment, or you can choose something that is more in line with who you want to be in this world and manifest that person in your everyday choices. And it's not just your choices that make a difference. When people see you making healthier, more sustainable, more humane choices, your example has influence. Perhaps they didn't know the plant-based option existed. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable choosing it until you did. Maybe they imagined that because they weren't vegan or they didn't identify as vegetarian, that choice wasn't for them. And I'd like to consider the following situation, and you can substitute this with any restaurant. Suppose you go to Burger King with your friends and everyone orders the meat-based Whopper. What are you most likely to order when you get to the counter? Most people are going to choose what's easiest, most familiar, at least, similar to what their friends are eating. Now imagine that one of your two friends orders the Impossible Whopper. Would you be a bit more likely to order it? Let's take it one step further. Imagine that all of your friends order the Impossible plant-based Whopper. If you're truly honest with yourself, how comfortable would you feel being the only person ordering the cow burger? Probably not all that comfortable. And the point is that social influence works both ways. Your choices are powerful and send a message not only to the companies, but to the people around you as well, which in turn influences those around them. That's the only way to change anything you disagree with in this world. So again, there's this social impact that I don't think our community of environmentalists has really been talking about, but it's not just about you choosing the Oatly milk or whatever the milk is, but the influence that it has on the people around you. That's where a lot of this power comes from and what we really need to do in order to shift that culture. All right, so I see that Eric is sharing some great cookbooks here in the chat. Thank you, Eric. I wanted to take some time to share some I have a lot of questions coming in to me individually, so I'm going to try and answer them. While I'm doing that, I just wanted to briefly share that this is our website, and this is how that you can get in touch with us. The majority of our work has been with high school and college students, and we've been actively recruiting students from schools in Mountain View in particular to join our summer or spring institutes to learn about all the impacts of factory farming, and really training these students to become advocates, to think about how we can affect change at the personally, with their communities, with their schools, with the state government. There are a lot of different things that we want to be working on. So if you have connections with students, please do share that internship opportunity. All right, I'm going to share this particular survey right now, and it would be really helpful if you gave me some information on what aspects of this presentation that you found interesting. Even just like answering like a few questions would be very helpful to me. So this is the URL, bit.ly/FFAC Enviro, and this is the QR code. And while you're doing that, I'm going to start trying to answer some of the questions that have come through specifically to me. So one person was asking me about what about people who are used to eating, drinking cow's milk, especially culturally? How do we deal with this complex situation? Indian people, for example, consume a lot of cow's milk. Chinese people right now are consuming a lot of pork. And the cultural connection is something that I've been thinking a lot about. So there are a couple of ways to talk about this. First of all, there can still be an emphasis on reduction and balancing. So again, you don't have to go 100% plant-based. There are still steps that can be made. I think that it's important to think about how dairy has changed from what it used to be and where we're at now with such high demand. Maybe posing it that way. If there are opportunities to talk about alternatives and ways to make products without cow's milk, then that can be really advantageous. Quick note on cow's milk though, I sometimes share a map of lactose intolerance around the world. And in that map, you'll see that most of Europe is not lactose intolerant, and huge amounts of Africa, huge amounts of Asia, huge amounts of South America, indigenous people, they're lactose intolerant. I think it's very interesting that here in the United States, every single public school student, and please let me know if you've seen anything differently in Mountain View schools, to my knowledge, every single public school student has milk as their default option at lunch. Is that true here in Mountain View still? That milk is the option for our students. I used to be a third grade teacher. Thanks, Helen, for confirming. I used to be a third grade teacher on the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. It was one of my first jobs after graduating from UC Berkeley. And as a third grade teacher, it was my job to walk up and down the aisles and tell the children that they had to open their cow's milk. And my principal told me to do that, or else she said, Monica, we will not get our funding. So I felt a lot of pressure to make all these kids open up their cow's milk. And it had an impact on them. We wouldn't even let them drink water because we only had one water fountain. So all of my Native children were lactose intolerant. They would drink the cow's milk. It caused their tummy to be hurt. If any of you are lactose intolerant, you can probably go into some detail on like what the implications are. It's not like you necessarily die, but your tummy hurts. They would get gaseous. They would go to the bathroom all the time. It just seemed ridiculous to me that we were forcing all these children to drink cow's milk when we knew that they were lactose intolerant. And this was also in a school where I had very few resources, but the principal would just drop off whatever had been sent, all these got milk posters featuring celebrities like Taylor Swift with her milk mustaches that we were supposed to use as book covers for all of our students. They don't even know who all these people are. But the dairy lobby is so strong. There are so many students that are lactose intolerant. I do not believe that we should be forcing kids to drink cow's milk if it is going to be making them sick. So right now, for a lot of folks, it isn't a choice. It's the only thing that is available to them. I'm hoping that there are some parents on this call that are starting to think about allergies and what's available. And you know what? You don't even have to be a parent. If you work in any place where there's food available, I mean, is it accommodating to people with different allergies, especially when we're thinking about cow's milk and the colonization of the United States and the food that we are being forced to eat on a regular basis as part of the standard American diet? So I could go on, but there's a lot to unpack there. And if folks are interested, this is something that we could go into further. Are there other questions that have come through? I see that folks are recommending some more Dr. Greger books. How Not to Die is certainly a great one. Thank you, Christine. Jan, I don't think I understand your comment about two being plant-based option. Maybe you can help me with that. If other questions come through. Sarah, if you can help me, the chat is very full. What are you asking about in regard to seafood specifically? Okay, thanks, Jan. All right, so John, I'm gonna ask for a little bit more detail with your question about seafood, because there's so much that I could be saying about seafood. Mary, you're asking how do we encourage other cities like San Jose to educate their residents to eat a more plant-based diet? What FFAC has found very successful is finding out what the specific climate action plans of a city are, and then trying to connect again, the impacts of our food choices with the environment. It's not insignificant. So if we can say that a way for us to help reduce or help us meet our carbon emission targets is to, pass some kind of resolution, whether it's encouraging a Green Monday, a Meatless Monday, if the city council is going to start showing up and eating plant-based at their meetings, if they can have more events such as this one where they talk about some of these connections and educate, if there are opportunities to make introductions so that an organization like mine, FFAC, can go into the schools and educate or speak to the senior centers. There are a lot of opportunities. And we actually have, Mary, a guide on this whole process. So please do email me, and I'll go back here, info@ffacoalition.org, and we can connect you to that. Great, thanks, Mary. All right. Let's see. Okay, so going back to seafood, I think, what do I want to say about seafood very broadly? Yeah, Kathleen, I do believe that Seaspiracy is an excellent documentary, and you can check that out. Again, I think that when people imagine harvesting from the sea, they're imagining somebody going out into like a little canoe and then dropping like a line into the water and then collecting one fish. But if you've ever seen how we actually get seafood to markets available to the average consumer in the United States, what we have are these huge trawling nets that go on for miles and miles and just collect everything in its path, right? And that leads to bycatch situations where you're not just getting the tuna fish or the shrimp, you're getting all the sea turtles, all the dolphins, everything in between are all cut up in these nets, and all these animals are dying. Is projected that we will soon have more plastic than fish left in the ocean. There's some very common consensus that our ocean is overfished. Some people try and say, well, maybe we should be having more aquaculture, which is essentially fish farming on land. It's factory farming of fish on land. And so what we'll do is we will, block off parts of a river or stream and essentially create a pool and just have thousands of fish in these very tight conditions, where we have all the issues that we have with factory farming, which is all these animals pooping, getting sick, the antibiotics, all of that water with the poop flowing downstream and impacting the whole environment. So it's very difficult to say universally that this is a more sustainable option. There are starting to be some more seafood alternatives as well. Great, it's good to see some other resources being shared. Yeah, Jan, I understand what it's like to feel really depressed about the treatment of other species in our planet. I think that the brilliance of this whole system, or maybe not the brilliance, but we're just so disconnected from our food. Most people don't think about where their food comes from. I talk to students and I say, where does milk come from? And they say a carton at the grocery store. They don't actually, some of them can't even say like it specifically comes from a cow, or they've never thought about how that cow needs to have a baby and how that baby needs to be separated, or how that baby would need to drink milk from its mother in order to survive. So there's just this disconnect that's happening. And that's why education is so important. And there are people, like our organization, all of our students who are going out there and sharing that information. I hope that after this, some of you will be interested in sharing some of this information as well, whether it was just a single stat or, again, just making that choice has an impact on other people. It really does. And if you are ever feeling really depressed, Jan, I, again, understand that. The number one thing that has kept me going through all of this is really focusing on the students. This next generation of students, they get it. There's no question that climate change is real. They understand that climate change is real. It's not a question to them. They are the ones that are going to be thinking about this reality and expecting it. And they're very, very, I'm not saying every single student, of course, but the students that I know that are growing Student Advocates Network, our growing alumni network, these are people who understand these connections. They are part of the Sunrise Movement, and they're saying like, hey, the Green New Deal should include more about factory farming and industrial animal agriculture. They might be involved in their La Raza clubs and saying, hey, we do want to make sure that this is connected to workers' rights, that it actually does have an impact. So again, the really interesting thing about factory farming and our food choices is it connects to every single social justice issue. There's a tie-in, there's an alignment with values. So yeah, Christine, maybe easier to convert, but they're just, again, aware of the situation that we have in the world. When I was growing up, I felt like, oh, climate change is going to influence like people in the Pacific Ocean. They're far away on this island. And for the last couple of years, we've had these terrible fires exacerbated by climate change. The kids could see, hey, this smoke here is impacting everybody, but especially people who do not have housing. They cannot just, stay in their homes with their air purifiers. They were able to name environmental injustice. So there's a lot of very hopeful things, I think, happening in terms of awareness. Of course, Jen. So people are talking about healthy plant-based fats. There's a whole long list of resources that we can provide. In fact, if anybody on this call right now can share a link to some of those sources, that would be really wonderful. I think you were also asking about ghee, and there are definitely a lot of more options available. And maybe, Holger, if you message me, I can actually even share with you a link, unless somebody else on the chat has that available right now. Okay. Sarah, I feel like I'm going over my time. I'm happy to stay on and answer calls or answer questions, but I wanted to be cognizant of whatever your plans are.
Thank you so much, Monica, for joining us today. Everybody else who joined us, I will be following up. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. I will be following up with you guys tomorrow with a recording of this presentation, as well as a survey. It's very brief, and we would love for you guys to fill it out because it helps us continue to provide you with amazing plant-based eating events like this and get feedback. So please keep an eye out for that tomorrow. And our next event will be in January, and we're hoping to have a feature on urban gardening. So thank you guys so much. And thank you so much, Monica. Your presentation was amazing.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And yeah, again, this is the link to our website. It's been such a pleasure to speak to so many locals. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.